on. Like, God, awesome. So attendees will start to join. Good morning, Lisa. I see you. I'm going to take myself off video and I'll put myself on mute now. But yeah, so excited for the sesh. See you soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Amy. Hi, Jessica. How's it going? And Adette, Nicola. I think some of our attendees are able to, oh yeah, there we go. They've joined audio now. Hi, Nicola. Hi, Adette. How's it going?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, good, thanks.
That's awesome. So apparently I won't be able to see you in this session, but I can hear you. You should all be able to take yourself off mute. So if something comes up and you want to say hi or answer a question, please feel free to do that. And we also have the chat as well. It's really nice for me anyway, when I'm doing a session like this, to be able to hear and see responses so I know everyone can hear me. And happy International Women's Day to all the amazing women who've joined so far as well. And Jenny, I'll hand over to you to like sort of continue welcoming everyone. I'll put myself on mute for now.
Hello. So I've just dropped a message into the chat, but very excited to have you all join us on International Women's Day. And we will give it a couple of minutes just to let everybody jump onto the call before we kick things off. But if you can, video won't work, so as Lauren said, won't be able to see you. But if you do want to jump in and say hello, you can take yourself off mute. And yeah, so I'll give it just another 1 or 2 minutes and then we will jump into the session. But please say hi.
Awesome. Thanks, Jenny. I can see, I think a couple of, oh, Lee, I think you're off mute. Did you want to say something? Hi, Lee.
Hi.
Hi.
Good morning.
Good morning. Happy International Women's Day.
International Women's Day, yes. Empowered women. Nice to see you all and Lois here. I'm here to support.
Thanks, Lee.
Where is everyone joining us from today? 20 people so far.
So I'll start. I'm in Dulwich Hill, and I'm on Gadigal land. If you happen to know what country you're on, it'd be great to know as well.
Awesome. Melbourne, Sydney, sunny Sydney. Melbourne's struggling this morning. Maybe we'll get there. About to have a 39-degree weekend, which is going to be interesting.
That's really hot for Melbourne. Hey.
Yeah. 3 days in a row, apparently.
Yeah, the weather, I feel like up here as well has been like crazy. It's like sometimes really hot, and then I've had to wear a jumper a couple of days as well. So
yeah.
Oh, who's joining us from Wollongong? Lisa. Oh no, not Lisa. Who was it? We've got Darragland. Amy's in Wollongong as well. Tiala. Yeah, I used to live in Wollongong. It's also, I miss the beach down there. It's so, especially for hot days like this, it's so good.
Okay, so I will kick things off so we can jump into the session. But again, thank you everybody for joining us this morning. We really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us, especially on International Women's Day. So I'm Jenny. I will be helping host the session. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat as well. So if you've got any questions, or if there are any technical issues, please pop them into there and I'll do my best to resolve those. I will start today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm hosting this panel discussion today, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait peoples participating in this session today. A little bit of housekeeping, so all the fun stuff. The event or this session will be recorded, and we will be sharing that with you after the session. So, you know, obviously, please interact, ask questions, get involved. The more you put into the session, the more you get out of it, and we really want you to walk away with some really insightful and useful tips and tricks. And again, if you have any questions as we go, please pop them into the chat and we'll try and answer them as we run through the session. But otherwise, we will hopefully have time for a bit of a Q&A at the end. So we'll try and loop back to those as well. But really this session is about you and providing as much information and insight as we can. And I will now hand over to Lauren to introduce themselves.
Thanks so much, Jenny. Hi, everyone. Oh, I love that we've got so many people taking the time out this morning to join us. Thank you so much for taking the time. And I do want to just start by also saying, like, you know, when we're talking about burnout today, and I think that when we talk about something like this, I really want to take a moment to say, like, I am not, you know, the be all end all expert on this. There will be so many insights that come from the people in this room today. So if you have thoughts, if you want to challenge some of the things I'm saying as well, like I kind of love that. So we get a bit of discourse going about things that we're talking about. That would be really, really great. We're going to kick things off with a little poll. I'm really, really curious to get your thoughts on this question. And actually, I might just stop sharing my screen so I can see the poll. So basically, I just want to know if you've ever felt chronically exhausted by work, disengaged or negative about the work that you do, ineffective or bad at your job, all of the above, which I can see a fair few are already saying, and none of the above. So if you can just pop your answers in there. We're almost got everyone's answer. Okay, wow. So a lot of us, a lot of us have experienced all of the above, which is very interesting. And, you know, that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today, because essentially, when it comes, I'll share my screen again. When it comes to burnout, really what we're talking about is that experience of all three. Although I also want to acknowledge that for burnout, really, it is something that is, you know, on a spectrum as well. We can be coming out of burnout, we can be going into it, and we'll be talking about some of the sort of warning signs when it comes to that as well. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country. I'm on Gadigal land today, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples living and working on the land today, as well as any First Nations people here in the room. I'm just going to click share results so everyone else can see what happened with that poll. So you can see 66% of people attending today were saying they felt all of the above. Alrighty. So like I was saying, burnout, essentially, I like to think about it as like it's these three E's are depleted: energy, engagement, and efficacy. And when it comes to the technical definition of burnout, the medical definition from the World Health Organization, it's talked about in the sense of it being in the occupational context and should it be applied to describe experiences in other areas of life. But I have a little bit of a bone to pick with that, because I actually think it's very difficult, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. It's very difficult to detangle work from other areas of life, especially when we look at things like unpaid labor and hidden labor, which we'll talk about a little bit in a minute as well. And if for anyone who's seen Severance, you'll know just how difficult it is to separate those two. So Severance is a story where basically you can cut off your memory. So you only have either your memory of work on one side and then your memory of life on the other, and the two never meet. And I think, you know, it just sort of helps to demonstrate that point, that for a lot of us, it's not as simple as you have work over here and everything else on the other side as well. All right. So I think also the other thing we need to think about is that identity plays a key role here. And I think this is a really important thing to mention on an important day like today. So, you know, we have our gender identity, our sexuality, our nationality, disability, racial identity, a whole bunch of other things. And how we think about ourselves and our identity plays a big role in terms of what we expect from ourselves and also what we think and believe others expect of us. And we know that, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, when it comes to women, women still do, in Australia, in the modern world, women still do the bulk of hidden work, the bulk of unpaid labor, and we know that has a huge impact on stress and anxiety. And I think it's really important to mention this at the outset, because when we talk about burnout, it's still also almost written through the male lens, I think, you know, to say in the occupational context, what does that really look like? What does that really mean? And I would love to hear your thoughts on that as well as we go. So this is a little bit of a joke that I kind of like to start off with when we're talking about burnout, which is what's the best way to prevent burnout? There's a really, really simple answer, and I can give it all to you, and then we can finish this event early. We simply need to stop taking on too much. And for a lot of you here, and myself included, I'm like, it's actually really hard to do that. So what I want to talk to you a little bit now is, why is that so hard? Why is it so hard to stop taking on too much? And I hinted at this question when I put out the video with Striving, I think it was a couple of days or yesterday, asking that question. You know, we got some really interesting answers in terms of why is that so hard to do. I should say a little bit more about myself before we continue. I'm Lauren, or Loz. I'm non-binary. So I just want to say that at the outset, because this is International Women's Day. And whilst I was raised as a female and I was raised as a girl, I transitioned to non-binary a few years ago. So I have lived experience of what it's like to be treated as a woman, but I don't currently identify as one. And I think that's really important when we're having a conversation like this, because I am fully in support of International Women's Day. I think it's so important. But I also recognize that some of those things, especially when it comes to identity, I currently don't have as much lived experience as others in the room. So I really want to hear your thoughts, and if this is hitting the mark for you, if you have questions as well. So I work as a career development counsellor, and I'm a qualified personal trainer as well. I run my own business, and I also am a success coach at Torrens University, Australia, and I work at Ultimo in Sydney. I am 100% a recovering perfectionist, and I've been burnt out a number of times because of that, as well as other reasons. And I think one of my biggest fears is disappointing others. And I think for me, that plays a huge role in where I've experienced burnout in my life. Okay, so we're going to now move on to a little activity. Ideally, I'd like to do this because we've got quite a big group. Amy, if we can do this in breakout rooms, I think it would be really, really great. What we're going to do is we're going to spend about 5 minutes in groups of 3, 4, there might be 5 in your room. And what I want you to do is share a time that you took on too much. And I want you to think about, why did you take on too much and what you would do differently now. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a minute so I can see what's happening, but I'll get, if we can, put everyone into those breakout rooms, and you'll be able to, oh, not that, that's not what I want to do. I would love to get your answers. Okay, I think I can see, oops, I can see the breakout rooms are popping up. But I think everyone's still here. Is that right, Amy?
I'm still here, Loz.
Yeah, I think you should have it pop
I
out.
joined.
That's,
I joined now. I've got it now.
yeah, you just press join.
Okay, join. Yeah.
All right, are people going into breakout rooms now?
I think so, because
Okay.
it looks like the number's dropping down.
Yes, yes, okay. All right, and I think we've got.
Oh, we've got 3 people on it. So sorry, 3 people on it. So is there anyone on the call who's not been assigned a room?
I think that looks right. That looks right.
Jamie?
Sorry, it's like, oh, hello, me.
Yeah, I don't have a room. I'll just be a
gross.
Nigel by myself.
It's always a little bit tricky. I think we've got Juliet and Grace are in here. Juliet and Grace, can you see the pop out that says to join? And Emma as well. I think we've got a couple of people.
I cannot see.
Okay, that's all right. So what we'll do for the people left in the room, maybe we can start with you, Emma. Juliet, I can see you put yourself on mute. Emma, you're not on mute. If you'd like to share a time that you took on too much and what you would do differently now.
I had a role where I
was probably working too hard, saying yes too much to everything, and trying to create lots and lots of I guess programs and make a real difference in the business. And I found that I just got completely burnt out as a result. So it just didn't work for me because I've got young kids, and I was trying to be everything for everyone, and in the end all I did was feel completely burnt out by it all.
Would you do something differently now, Emma, in hindsight?
Yeah, I don't say yes to as many things. I try and limit what I'm saying yes to now, so I'm not overdoing myself, and I'm making sure that I'm actually making time, the right amount of time for everybody, and some time for me. I found that really making time for yourself is really important in all of this, because if you don't actually carve out that time, you just completely burn out.
100%. Absolutely. Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Emma. Juliet, are you happy to share as well?
Yeah, sure. I guess I have a high level of expectation of myself and what I do, and really always keen to deliver or over deliver. So I guess I put my own pressure, and I don't necessarily need anyone else's pressure, but it's more about how I can manage my own expectations and maybe people's expectation. And I would join Emma saying that it's very hard to say no, and I just say yes, yes, yes to prove that I can do it, I can excel, can work hard. I guess I'm always in this search of just doing better my job, but it's always a struggle to juggle work and family with a young family. So. And I do not know what I would be doing differently apart of trying to change, to reset my own expectations. And I think there is, a way bigger work on this one, but I'm not sure how I would be able
That's
to
okay.
do
We're
that.
going to be talking more about that today. It's all good. Thanks, Juliet. I know we've got a few others, Jamie, Grace, and Lizzie. We'll probably have to start pulling back people in a second, but did any of you want to share your answers while we're here as well?
For me, when I had my first people management role, and I was super keen to prove myself and be all things to everyone in the business. And over time, I've learnt to manage other people's expectations as well as my own. And like Juliet, I've got really high expectations of myself, and I want to be seen as the expert and the person who can fix everything. So it's about pulling it back and just like accepting that I can't do it by myself. And now I use my team and leverage my team quite heavily and delegate out.
Amazing, amazing. So you've kind of come out the other side of it.
Oh
Well,
yeah.
please do continue sharing your insights and your thoughts also, everyone. We'll close the rooms now. Amy, do you want to do that, or do you want me to do that?
I've tried it now and I know it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, we're back. Are we?
Hello. Sorry for cutting you short if you were still
Very
going
good.
through your answers. Just really quickly, I'd be curious if anyone wants to quickly share what their group discussed. Just some of the highlights, some of the key themes. I'll share what we discussed. So there was that kind of expectation, like we'd been talking about. So, wanting to be the expert, wanting to be seen as, okay, I know what I'm talking about. And we also had some around just like when you start a new job, when you become a parent for the first time. Does anyone else want to share their sort of group insights as well?
We haven't finished ours actually. Tracy and Christine and myself, we're talking about, experiences and why do we always like maybe take in too much. I'm not sure if Christine wants to speak as well or Tracy, but maybe I'll just maybe share my thoughts on behalf as well. Tracy and Christine, please let me know if you want to speak up as well. For me, with the experiences that I had, and of course with Christine and Tracy as well, whatever experience they had before, we often take on too much because of various reasons, such as like, feeling the pressure to meet expectations, wanting to prove ourselves, maybe fear of like missing out, or simply having a hard time saying no. And just like me as a nurse myself for the past 30 years, in the operating theater and critical care and part of the medical emergency team, we are just there to do our job really well, our mission to save lives, putting them first before ourselves and before myself in particular, until such time that I've already experienced like burnout. Burnout is real, physical symptoms, I even collapse as well in the
Wow.
midst of working. They found me I was supposed to share this with Christine and Tracy a while ago. And they found me in the staff uh, toilet, unconscious.
Wow.
And the reason was I was already, my body is really saying, come on, rest. And there was a time as well, on the second time that we had an operation for more than 24 hours. It was like brain surgery, spinal surgery, and it's really a long surgery. The next day I couldn't move, and I already felt the reality of being paralyzed, and it was scary. I couldn't move, and I felt like I still love to do the things I love to do as being a nurse, but then the doctor said you need to slow down. And yes, if you continuously, if it's hard for us to say no all the time, we didn't realize that our bodies are already trying to cope with the stress, the physical, the mental, the emotional, everything in all aspects of life. And in this world that values productivity and business, it's easy to fall into the trap of overcommitting ourselves. So it's important to remember that it's okay to set boundaries, prioritize self-care, and delegate tasks when needed. And learning to say no and focusing on what truly matters can help prevent taking on too much and avoid burnout. That's my 10 cents, Buzz.
Yeah, 100%. And actually, I'm really glad you mentioned boundaries, because we're going to talk about that a little bit more. And Lee, thanks for sharing your story. I mean, like, part of what you were talking about there as well, where it's like that extreme end of like your body is physically going, I cannot do this anymore. Like, I
Yeah.
am forcing you to shut down now. And, I mean, a big part of what I want to, sort of really push today or talk about today, encourage us all to think about, is to try to not get to that point, because sadly, what often happens is that we almost like have to go far. So for a lot of people, they've had to go that far to then start to realize, oh, actually, I need to take care of myself. And like you said, Lee, as well, like being in a helping position, like being a nurse, and like hats off to all the amazing people in healthcare. Like I know what that's like too. My ex is an emergency doctor. And it's like, thank you for your service, because it's a lot, and I can see there's lots of love hearts and claps. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to stop it there and just come back to the slides, just because I'm conscious of time. But we will be continuing our discussion, especially towards the end. I'm hoping we can have some time for a discussion with everyone. But we'll keep going for now. And thanks again, Lee, for sharing that. So I want to, and I'm curious to know if like these themes came up in your group discussions as well. Some of the reasons can be practical reasons. It can be, I have to study and I have to work. We say that a lot at Torrens as well. I have like a lot of things to do because that's where I am in life, and I just have to push through and do that. And that's completely valid. When our job's at risk, or we feel like our job's at risk, we might take on too much to be like, no, I'm good at my job, I'm getting results. And then we also have, our current situation involves a lot of pressure. And I myself have fallen into the trap of being like, oh, it's just for a week. It's just for a week. I need to, do this. And I did that for a year. I worked 7 days for a year. And then I was like, hang on a second, I can't keep doing this. This is not sustainable, So it can be from these like sort of practical things, but we need to be careful of those other underlying things. So these sort of themes, I imagine, would have come up for you as well. And these are sort of more the non-tangible reasons, like fear of not being good enough, of being overlooked, especially for something like a promotion. I'm afraid to speak up. I don't want to get into a conflict. I let myself down if I don't. you know, I'll let someone else down if I don't do this. I'll be judged or I'll be criticized. What if I fail? I feel guilty if I don't. I won't be accepted, and I don't know who I am when I stop. And I think that last one around, I don't know who I am when I stop, I think comes back again to that identity piece around, you know, it can actually feel very scary to have nothing to do, especially if you've been doing a lot for a long time. We can get that sense of emptiness when we're just sitting with ourselves if we haven't done that for a long time. So the other thing that's being sort of talked about in this session today is around self-care. So we'll talk about that as well. So like I said, part of this really does come back to identity. And I think if we just look at the historical context of the what it means to be a woman and what's happened, like so much, you know, patriarchy for such a long time, I think when we come back to things like this, there is a lot to be said for, especially around those things like, you know, I'm going to be overlooked. What if I fail? I'm going to be judged or criticized. And we know from research that especially when it comes to male-dominated industries, those things can play a role as well. So I want to talk about burnout as sort of this concept of being the tip of the iceberg. So whilst we might be able to recognize those symptoms of burnout, you know, we talked about like low energy, low efficacy, low engagement. We know that there's actually a lot more that's linked with it. And I like to kind of think about it like this. So above the surface, the things that we often talk about from a corporate perspective is the negative impact that burnout has on the workplace, you know, lower performance, lower engagement, poor communication, you know, it contributes to a negative culture. We will often on the surface also talk about things like, you know, poor boundaries can be contributing to burnout, but there's actually a lot more that lies underneath that. So we have things like being extrinsically motivated, you know, looking for the external reward rather than doing something because it's meaningful to ourselves. Having a maladaptive stress response, which starts to tap into what's actually happening to us physiologically as well. We have fear and shame, you know, so we talked about some of those themes already. And fear and shame also has an impact on our physiological well-being. And then right at the bottom, we sort of have some of those fears of not being loved, of not being accepted, that come right back to some of the things that might have happened to us as a child. So that kind of wounded inner child who isn't getting their needs met. And that can be contributing to all these behaviors that are happening further upstream or up that iceberg. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about boundaries. You know, so we have unhealthy boundaries and we have healthy boundaries. So unhealthy boundaries, I think a lot of us, when we think about unhealthy boundaries, we'll think about, you know, the people pleaser. Their boundaries are extremely permeable, or, you know, someone who is like a bit of a doormat, people can like walk all over them. But another type of unhealthy boundary as well is being overly rigid or inflexible. So being unwilling to compromise or unwilling to collaborate and come to a decision that might not completely meet their what they want to see or what they want to see happen. Having no boundaries, of course, or being poorly enforced. So we could say one thing, but then when it comes to actually someone trying to encroach on our boundaries, we might not have the tools available to enforce our boundaries, or just might not feel secure in being able to say something. A healthy boundary, with healthy boundaries, we're effective at protecting our physical, our emotional, and our psychological well-being. We're able to enforce them with a reasonable amount of flexibility. We recognize that our boundaries are really there to stay true to our own values and beliefs, and we communicate them well. We know how to communicate them and establish our boundaries. I think with extrinsic motivation, probably a lot of us are quite familiar with this, but just really, really quickly, extrinsic motivation really is about that engaging in activity to attain external rewards and avoid punishment. And there is some research actually suggesting that people who are more extroverted are more likely to be a bit more extrinsically motivated. Not to say that they, you know, can't be intrinsically motivated, just that they might have a bit more of a natural tendency to be extrinsically motivated. When we're intrinsically motivated, like I mentioned before, we find value, pleasure, and meaning in the actual activity that we're doing. So coming back to some of the examples that were talked about before, the ones that I came across around when we're talking about something like a new job or a promotion, And we really want to be seen to be doing well. That's extrinsically motivated. Intrinsically motivated, Lee mentioned, one of the things with being a nurse is that you actually really do have that desire to help people. That's more of an intrinsic motivation. That can still, it's not to say that that can't lead to burnout, but it's just coming from a different place. So is it coming from within you, or is it coming externally? So the maladaptive stress response, this is a theory put forward by Dr. Stephen Porges called the polyvagal theory. And basically it's around looking at how our body responds to stress. So you can see there you have that kind of like, oh, my hand's going blurry. You're going to have this wave, which is like a healthy stress response where, yes, we might get a little bit stressed from time to time. Of course, there are stressors in our lives. We can't eliminate stressors in our lives. If you are a parent, if you are working, if you're studying, if you're, of course, there's going to be things that come up in our day-to-day life. This isn't about, saying, well, we can't have any stress in our lives. It's more about how our body responds to it. And this starts to give us some clues also into what might be happening when it comes to the inner child as well. Because if we have something that is seemingly, perhaps to others, a small stressor, but we have this big reaction to it, it could be that it's sort of triggering something that's underlying for us. So someone's, I can be very sensitive to criticism. It's something that I am actively working on a lot. But for someone else, I might be like, oh, someone said I didn't do a great job. That's like good feedback. And they can kind of go back into the green. For me, it might become, I'm panicking, I'm angry, I'm irritated, and then even going into a freeze response. A freeze response is where we start to feel more like depressed, numb, dissociated, and experience those feelings of shame. So a lot of us, when we talk about the fight or flight response, we think about that, I'm going to run away from the problem. I'm going to avoid the problem. I'm going to get away from it. Or I'm going to fight. I'm going to put up an argument. I'm going to get angry. I'm going to fight. When we go into freeze, it's almost like our body starts to shut down. And the chemicals that are involved in each of those stages are different as well. So in the fight or flight response, our blood pressure is increasing, our heart rate's increasing, we're getting adrenaline. When we're in a freeze response, it's more like we're collapsed. So our body actually starts to receive like internal like pain chemicals, like pain relief chemicals, to kind of try to numb us. Okay, I can't do anything, so I just have to try to numb the pain. And when we're constantly in that kind of state, it can be very, very hard to establish healthy boundaries and to take care of ourselves and do those basic sort of self-care things. It can get really, really tricky. Underneath that is that sort of fear and shame. And again, like I said, like this taps into that, what happened, what are our deepest fears? What are the things that we were made to feel ashamed of when we were a child? So, fear, we're going into that fight or flight, the sympathetic nervous system, some of you might have heard about before. We sort of have these two systems in our body. We have the sympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for arousal. It's very important. It helps take care of us when something that we perceive as a threat comes, we come into contact with that. But it's an I can do something about this state. I can fight, I can flee. It's about mobilizing the body. And like I said, it increases our blood pressure, our heart rate, fuel availability, and adrenaline. But if we're in this state for a long time, this becomes chronic stress, and it has a big impact on our health, and it has a big impact on, our ability to process food, our ability to exercise, our ability to engage with work. It has a huge impact on, we can end up with, disease, chronic diseases, because our body is sort of like, it can't be in a chronic stress state forever. It's not a sustainable state to be in. And then with shame, like I said, this becomes an I can't state. So we freeze, we immobilize, and then it sort of becomes more about that, okay, we've got to just release endorphins to try to, get you feeling okay with the pain that you can't do anything about. and I keep mentioning the wounded inner child just to touch on that really quickly. There are 7 inner child archetypes. They're talked about in slightly different ways, but this is one sort of model that we can go with. So we have all of these inner child archetypes that are essentially wounded inner children. And a lot of us might relate to one or multiple. It starts to give us clues on some of the things that might also be triggering us when it comes to those stressors as well. So the caretaker believes that they're loved because they take care of others. The overachiever is I'm loved when I receive external validation. The underachiever, if I go unnoticed, that's going to keep me loved and myself and others safe. The rescuer, I receive love by taking away other people's problems. The life of the party, I receive love by making sure people around me are all happy, everyone happy, everyone happy. Okay, all right, I'm okay now, I'm safe. The yes person, who receives love by being selfless. And the hero worshiper. And hero worshiper receives love by rejecting their own needs and instead looking at someone else as a model of what it is to be happy, what it is to live a good life. And also, if you have any questions, I can see there's a few things coming up in the chat. I'll make sure we get time to sort of talk through them as well. So I want to look at some of these triggers now and how those different layers sort of interplay with each other. So trigger could be, oh, look, I'll need you to work overtime tonight. The boundary that for you might be encroached. Like sometimes it might be like, okay, I can do that tonight, it's fine. But if it's encroaching your boundary, it could be like, that's not really what I want for my work-life balance. But then there might be a fear underneath that, like, I don't really want to get into any sort of conflict about it. And that might come from that sort of inner child archetype of the yes person. I'm going to be valued for saying yes, you know, and it can relate to others as well. This is just an example. Another one, you better send me an outline of the report first so I can make sure you've got everything covered. So the boundary encroached there is decision-making autonomy, you know, sort of being patronized. But the possible fear there could be, I'm going to let someone else down. So my boss knows best. I'll just give them a copy of the report first. Another one, I don't think you need to be a part of that training session. Boundary encroached, well, that's my professional development. I want to be a part of that. Possible fear could be, I'm a bit afraid to speak up. And the inner child is kind of like, it's actually just better to go unnoticed. That's that underachiever one. It's just, you know what, it's not a big deal. I'm not going to say anything. It's better I don't make a fuss. Another one, I know you've got a lot on your plate, but I also need you to treat this as a priority. So the boundary encroached there, workload management. Possible fear could be, I'm going to feel guilty if I don't do this. And so the inner child could be, you know, I'm great at getting things done. That overachiever, yep, okay, I can do something else. Yep, put it on my plate, no worries. I should be able to do this because you're asking me, so I'm not going to say anything about it. Another one, I didn't end up mentioning your idea to the leadership team. Boundary encroached there could be communication and feedback at work. Possible fear, oh, okay, I'm not good enough. My idea wasn't good enough. I'm not going to mention my idea next time. And the inner child could be that kind of, as long as my boss is happy, you know, that, again, that yes person. Okay, if you're happy, I'm happy, it's fine. So those patterns can lead to less energy, less engagement, less efficacy. We can start to see how those things are linked together. When we nurture our inner child, we start to sort of change the direction of this. So it means that we're able to take care of our inner child core needs. So these are sort of, I think there's 6 of them. Yeah, 6 inner child core needs. I got this from a fantastic book I highly recommend called How to Meet Yourself, the workbook for self-discovery by Dr. Nicole LaPera. And what I love about this book is it really focuses on, you know, actually interacting with the content as well. And she talks about these sort of 6 needs. So identity, having a sense of self, safety, a sense of safety to fully express yourself, connection and love. So having that emotional bond with others, and that comes from being vulnerable and feeling safe to be vulnerable with others. Autonomy, so freedom to choose what's best for yourself. Variety and stimulation, so that's that desire to learn, see and experience new things. And growth as well, so the willingness to face challenges in order to learn from those experiences as well. We're able to take care of those needs. You can start to see, like if you think about what we were just talking about with the stress response, with fear and shame, it sort of has like a bit of a it's sort of like a tipping point. That's how I see it. It's like, if you look at the inner child core needs, everything else kind of starts to repair itself. Not to say that you can't work on, okay, what's my stress response like, and, you know, have self-care activities to help with that, or look at how do I regulate my emotions better and strategies to do that. We can come in at all of those points. But to me, I just think if we don't get that core right, I mean, I've experienced this firsthand, you know, if we don't start with that core, it makes all of those other things really tricky. So for me, what I experienced was, for a long time, you know, I saw a therapist for a very long time. I experienced depression and anxiety. And I was really trying to look at those strategies for healthy boundaries, for having a better stress response. You know, I was known to like fly off the handle and get really angry. So I was like, oh, I've got to fix my emotional regulation. But actually what I realized was that I felt empty until I was about 30 years old. And the tipping point for me was when I realized I was gay. So I had sort of not really worked out my sexual identity. I hadn't really worked out who I was. And when I sort of had this tipping point of self-acceptance, that actually had a huge impact on everything else in my life. And suddenly things that I'd spent 5, 6, 7 years trying to work through sort of changed overnight. And I felt like, oh, I'm actually comfortable with who I am now. It doesn't have to be around sexual identity. It can be about anything. But I just think that focusing on nurturing your inner child just has such a big impact. And I don't think we talk about it enough in our modern society. So when we do this, we're able to ignite passion, restore balance, and cultivate resilience. I mentioned this before. Invisible and unpaid work is a huge challenge when it comes to what's happening to women in Australia and also globally as well. So globally, women take on 3 times as much unpaid care and domestic work as men. And in Australia, women spend 9 hours a week more than men on unpaid work and care. Also in Australia, women do more unpaid housework than men, even when they're the primary breadwinners. Which I just think is absolutely crazy in 2024. I don't understand how, I mean, I do understand how it's happening, but I'm like, that really needs to change. I'm sure you all agree with that. We know that the more of this unpaid labor women do, the worse their mental and physical health is, and that's a burnout risk factor too. So if you haven't come across this book, I just wanted to put this out there. It's called Fair Play by Eve Rodsky, and she focuses on a game-changing solution for when you have too much to do. And it really is about navigating those conversations to ensure that, you know, your unpaid sort of labor is shared fairly when it comes to those domestic and household chores. There's also the Fair Play deck. So if you don't want to go through a book, there is also this sort of couples conversation cards that can be a really great way to look at, you know, sharing the workload as well. I believe that the most important occupation we have is to love and care for ourselves. And I think that comes back to sort of the oxygen mask principle. You know, if we're thinking about other people, we're thinking about our kids, we're thinking about our parents, we're thinking about members of our family, we're saying, oh, I've got to look after everyone, I need to take care of everyone else's needs. You have to take care of yourself before you can do anything else for others. And I feel like, you know, for a lot of us, that might be obvious, but it's easier said than done as well. When you have people in your life that you really care about, it's very hard to not fall into that trap of putting their needs above our own. Okay, so this will be our last little activity for today. What I want you to do now, we're going to go back into our breakout rooms, and I want you to think about a time you've remembered your oxygen mask. So before we talked about when you've taken on too much, I want you to focus on a time you set a healthy boundary in order to take care of yourself. And I want you to share how it felt and how you can remind others to do the same. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen again. And let's see, I think you'll just need to click join again. There should be a join button to click. I can see there's still a few attendees in the room. And it looks like Jamie, Julia, and Lizzie are in here. Do any of you want to share your answer to that one? I've got silence. Amy.
Some people may just hello. Some people may just be listening in as well. So I think there's some people who aren't able
to join. Juliet, I think you've got your microphone off mute.
Yes, that's a tough one.
What's that? It's a tough one. Yeah.
I don't know. I can't recall. I'm lucky enough to be very well supported. My family and husband, and there is no. That's a fair share, or in fact, he does more than I. So, so it's more work, and I'm not sure. So
yeah,
I'm ready to hear the others.
That's all right. That's all right. Jamie or Lizzie, do you want to share your answers? I can share mine as well. So for me, one of the things that I did, I mentioned I was doing work, like I was doing 7 days a week. And I think for me, it just really simple thing, but just saying no to shifts sometimes, like I can't do that. I'm not able to take on that extra work. A really simple one, but really effective. You know, it's not sustainable to work that much. So just learning to say no, and then also realizing when I said no, that was okay. So I had for years been saying to people, oh, just say no, just say no. But when it came to myself, I theoretically understood that, but practically speaking, I actually found it very hard. So I think, yeah, just that really simple thing of saying no. And that's what now when I say it to other people, I'm kind of a bit more like, I know it's really hard, but once you say it once, it does become easier as well. How are we going for time? I reckon maybe we'll give it one more minute, Amy. What do you think?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so easy to know these things are important, but think that they don't apply to us.
Yeah.
Right? You're like, oh, but that's not for me though, it's for everyone else. That they're probably struggling far more than me. And you know, it's an interesting
100%. Lizzie, what did you say? I can't speak at the moment, but I found my last role difficult because I have chronic fatigue. Yeah, okay. And I was struggling with the normal working week while my team were regularly working overtime. I wanted to be good at my job, but I always felt like I wasn't good enough, and it's affecting my confidence now that I'm looking for jobs again. And Lizzie, yeah, that is really tough, especially I know the job market at the moment is pretty tough as well. Trying to find a job and it's that is supportive of my health, but it's hard to be picky when I need financial security. Absolutely. Even in interviews, I catch myself overcommitting to what I'm able to do because I don't know how to land the role. And I think that also, Lizzie, comes back to that, you know, high pressure. When we feel like we're in that high pressure situation, we're more at risk of burnout. And it could be, you know, one thing we'll sort of touch on this in a minute is just making that time for self-care and recovery. And also when we start to get the really tricky thing with that, it's the same with like I run my own business for 8 years now. And, you know, if I didn't have work coming in, it was extremely stressful, you know. So then the next sales pitch you do, the next conversation you have, it can feel like it has more of that weight to it because you're more and more in need of that job. And so I found myself doing a similar thing. Oh, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. And I can do it all for a very small price, you know. And what happens actually is sort of sometimes the opposite of what we think will happen. So instead of getting the job, we might appear like a little bit too in need of the job. And so they go, oh, you'll take anything, so I'll overlook you. So what I would say with something like that, because it is really, really tricky, is, you know, try to get a little bit of support with that. There's actually a free website you can use. New South Wales like Career has a website, and you can actually have a free conversation with a career counsellor. So if you're kind of needing more support with those interviews as well, I would definitely recommend that, and I can find a link for you after this and share it with you as well. Amy, I think let's bring everyone back in if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Of course, you're welcome.
I did send
Lizzie.
Yeah, too many days rows.
Hi, sorry for bringing you back. Sometimes I feel like I should just have the questions and not just let everyone talk, because I think
We're
it's
frozen.
it can be such a great thing. Yeah, I'm conscious of time, and so I'm sorry everyone, I had to pull you back from your conversations. I hope they were useful and insightful. There's sort of one more key thing I want to touch on before we go to questions, and this is around what I developed this called the self-care spectrum, just taking a little bit more of a holistic look at burnout, because I just think when we come to those like medical definitions, it can be feel a little bit like we're an imposter. Oh, I don't really have burnout, or I'm not really at risk of burnout because I'm not at that point. So I want to kind of validate those experiences that might be, in the middle on the spectrum. So, on one extreme I like to use the analogy of a fire. So if we think about a fire when it's really like blazing, we're doing really well, we're thriving. And if we think about the opposite end, when we're facing an almost burnout, our fire is absolutely starving. It just doesn't have the fuel it needs to keep going. And eventually that fire will go out. And that's when we have things like collapse. That's when we have things like hospitalization. We really, really don't want anyone here to get into that situation, or I hope no one has been in that situation. I mean, Lee, you mentioned your situation. I'm hoping there's not too many people that have been through that, because it's really, really tough. We sort of, I think a lot of us sit here in the middle where our fire is burning. And what I mean by that is it's sort of like if you picture a fire, you have just enough fuel going in for the fire to keep going, but we don't have any reserve. So it's kind of like almost if you think about a campfire, you'd be going out collecting fuel, just enough fuel for that day. You don't have anything, stockpiled there. Then we have like the suffocating fire, and the suffocating fire is where we're starting to get into that sort of downward spiral. We now don't have quite enough fuel for the fire. We don't have any in reserve, and we start to see some symptoms from that as well. So excessive worrying, reduced activity and energy, reduced productivity. And like if you think about some of those things we talked about with the fight or flight or freeze response as well, those things can start to manifest. So irritability, criticism, negativity towards others as well, increased sensitivity towards criticism. And I've already said enough for you to know that sometimes I've experienced that myself too. So, really what we need to be doing is looking at how do we refuel our fire? How do we have that stockpile in reserve, so that if we have a day where we're a bit stretched, we've already got fuel there to help us get that fire blazing again. So these are sort of the 5 ways to refuel your fire that I put together. I call it the grit recipe. So we have a growth mindset, which is really about, I love who I am now, but I also have clarity around who I want to become. There's nothing wrong with who I am. I completely accept who I am now, but I want to keep growing. And we think about that inner child need of growth. That's a really important thing, to be able to go, I accept who I am, but I also I'm engaged in life. I want to, and I've got clarity around what that is. So the mindset, and I think this can be summed up in a really simple sentence of, I'm not there yet. Oh, okay, like I didn't do so great in this, or I failed at this particular project. Oh, I'm not there yet. That's okay. That's life is long, restorative fuel. So our boundaries are there to protect us and protect our fuel around a bunch of things. These are some of the common ones that I put in here. It could look different for different people. So spiritual fuel, physical fuel, mental fuel, social fuel, romantic fuel, emotional fuel. And all of these things can look different for different people. There was a comment when I asked the question yesterday about why do we take on too much? And one person said, actually, I take on too much because I want to, and I've said that before. Actually, Lee, who's on the call today, we had a conversation about this, and we were talking about, when it comes to what that looks like for me, I'm writing a novel on the side at the moment because I love to do that. And there's nothing wrong with doing too much. It just depends what your needs are and what that looks like. And it might not be too much for you. So figuring out what that looks like and what you value is really, really important. Inspired habits. So thinking about what you want and then doing it as well. I'm going to really run through these slides quickly. So but it is recorded. So if you want to have, and I'm happy to send a copy of the slides as well for anyone who wants that, but just that we can overthink, underthink, and get it just right. And the same with doing. So what we tend to have really simplistically is we tend to have people who either think a little bit too much or people who do a little bit too much. And when we balance it, that's often to do with our personalities. We tend to be stronger at one or the other. We need to actively try to be, or proactively get those into balance. I want to think about my goal, and then I'm going to find the habits that align with that. Targeted development. So really, really simply, like if you think about a SWOT analysis that we do in business as well, doing that on yourself. What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? Where are my opportunities? And where are my threats? And having a trustworthy tribe as well. So seeking out like-minded communities, building genuine relationships over time, and asking for help when you need it. So last little thing I'm going to leave you on before we go to our discussion is just that, and you can look this up, I'll share the link as well, is just around what we can do when we want to change something and we want to take better care of ourselves. So step one is really about discovery, identifying our SMART goals and potential roadblocks. Step two, taking some action and addressing immediate concerns and priorities. Step three, building congruent habits that enable long-term success, so taking action. And that the difference between initiate and action is that we just want to address the like, if something's on fire, we want to address that first before we, go to everything else. Step four, learning. So getting curious and leveling up on new skills. And I put this at this point because I think sometimes when we go, okay, I'm going to go for it, we can, especially if we're at risk of burnout, it can be like, I'm going to start doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And it's like, maybe just let's start doing a 15-minute walk every day first, So like having that, taking some action on the key things first, and then we can start to learn and grow more. Step five, integrate. So prepare for ongoing self-care in our daily routine. So this is really when we start to turn the things that we've been doing into habits. So we might be starting off experimenting with some self-care routine ideas. Step five is where we start to integrate it. It becomes part of our life. My partner said to me yesterday, she said, how long are you going to do this like high protein diet for? And I said to her, it's not a diet. That's just how I choose to live my life, because I know it has such a good impact on my health, and I like going to the gym, and I have to fuel my body with a lot of protein to do that. And I was like, I think that's kind of a really good example of that integration. It doesn't feel like I'm on a diet. It just feels like I'm taking care of myself. And that's really that integrate piece. And step six is nurture. So this is where we continue to practice and build on build our healthy habits so that we can have that blazing fire. All right, I'm going to stop sharing now. This QR code, that goes to my website. I know we talked about a lot today, and there was also discussion. So if you want sort of more information around this, if you go to my website, you'll also find the link to my podcast, which is called Refuel Your Fire. You'll find a link to my YouTube channel called The Cheat Sheets. And you can, there's a lot of free resources I provide around this, so please check that out. But for now, I'll go back to you, Jenny, and if there were any sort of key questions that came up in the chat, I'm happy to address them now as well.
I don't think there were any questions that I spotted, but if anybody has anything that they want to jump in and ask away now, we've got a couple of minutes left, so now's your chance.
I can see a few people had to leave early as well, but said they had a good time. So that's awesome. Yes, I was like, racing to finish. I think whenever there's conversation involved, it can be like a bit longer, but it sounds like there were some really good conversations in the breakout rooms. If anyone wants to share anything that they found particularly useful or that came up, please feel free to share now as well.
Awesome. I think there were some really, really great takeaways in there. I particularly loved the grit at the end, and we'll definitely be doing some self-reflection. Lots of things hit close to home. But I personally really enjoyed that session, and based on all the comments, it looks like everyone else did too. So if no one has any questions, I will thank you all for your time this morning, and thank you, Lauren. It was an amazing session, and I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their International Women's Day, and has a lovely weekend ahead. Happy Friday.
Yeah, happy International Women's Day, everyone. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Lauren.
Thanks, Lee.
See you later. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Lauren. And I hope everyone has the best International Women's Day. Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
everyone.